Welcome back, scientists. Today we are going to take a look at population dynamics. And our essential question for this lecture series is, what factors control population sizes? So we're really going to be talking about what are the things that limit how big a population can be, or what are the things, conversely, that can actually make a population grow much larger. So some vocabulary that we're going to use, that you should become familiar with these words. We've got population, birth rate, death rate, growth rate, migration, immigration, emigration, extant, and extinct. Now, some of these I know are ones that are going to be familiar to you, and some of them you might not have heard before. So if you ever run into that moment, go ahead, pause, make a note of it, and we'll come back to it later. So first of all, talking about limiting factors of population size. Limiting factors are those factors that are going to make it harder for populations to grow larger. They are the things that are going to say that you can only support 100 individuals rather than 1,000. Essentially, the major one is that individuals in a population are all competing for the same resources, and they may be competing with other species as well. This leads to limited resources and enforces an upper limit to population growth unless more resources become available. Remember that resources are things like food, water, shelter, access to mates, things like that. That's a resource that every single individual needs in order to survive and reproduce. Now, populations can also be limited in their size by external forces, such as natural disasters, diseases, and changes in weather and/or climate. Remember back to 6th grade, the difference between weather and climate. Weather is the day-to-day things, climate is long-term. We've got a couple different ways that populations can actually grow. We've got both the S-curve and the J-curve. And you're going to notice both of them, well, they seem like they've got these little kind of curves in them, but there's a major difference here. The S-curve, it goes up and it starts off just like the J-curve, but the S-curve levels off. And you'll notice the population size goes back down, and then it kind of goes back up and back down and back up until it eventually starts to hover right around that red dotted line. And that red dotted line is called the carrying capacity for the population. It's the population size that the population can sustain. On the other side is what we have, the J-curve. The J-curve is misleading because it looks just like the beginning of the S-curve, except it just keeps going up. The J-curve is an example of exponential growth. J-curves, a lot of times we'll see that if we do an experiment where we are culturing bacteria and we add some bacteria to a culture, they will start off growing really slowly and then they'll grow very, very rapidly. And that's an example of an early J-curve. But every single population that we know of has eventually turned into an S-curve. No population, this is foundational, no population can grow infinitely. So we've got now species interactions, and we're thinking about species interactions. We've talked about these before. These are things like the various kinds of symbioses, competition, and predation. How do they affect populations and how many individuals can live in an area? And it really depends on what types of interactions are at play. Obviously, if you're in a mutualistic relationship, this is beneficial, so there's possibly going to be more of you if that other organism is there. So if I am, for say, a clownfish that needs to live in anemones, if there's a lot of anemones, well, probably there's going to be a lot more clownfish because of this mutualism. Now, if we think about a different scenario, we've got a parasite. What might the introduction of a parasite do to a population? Is it going to increase the population size or decrease the population size? And same thing for invasive species. What is that going to do to a population? Both of these are going to serve to decrease the population size because they are going to have a negative effect on that population. Now we have to think about human population growth, and there's really two main views. One of them is that we're fine, the planet will always give us the resources we need, and we'll just keep growing. Number 2, the planet's eventually going to run out of resources, and we won't be able to sustain our current rate of growth. So what do you think? Stop for a minute. Think to yourself. There is a third option, and the third option might be that we colonize Mars, which is becoming increasingly more realistic and slightly scary to think about. But let's dive deeper. Our current estimate for the number of people on the Earth is about 7.4 billion people. That's a lot of people. The projected estimate for 2050 is that we're going to have 9.4 billion people. And right now, that's looking like a really steep J-curve. And I want you to take a moment and let's watch this video and see what the human population has looked like through time and what the human population is projected to do. I hope that left you with something to think about. That's all, scientists. As always, stay curious and have an amazing day.